Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Michelle Graff, and I'm the Editor-in-Chief at National Jeweler. I'm pleased to welcome you to the latest episode of My Next Question, National Jeweler's webinar series sponsored by Jewelers of America. Today's session is hosted by our Associate Editor, News, Lenore Fedow, and features Mark Devereaux of Jewelers Mutual and Andrew Chipman of Berkley Asset Protection. Before I turn it over to Lenore to get the webinar started, I just wanted to let our attendees know that if they have a question, they can type it into the Zoom Q&A box. I will be back on at the end of the discussion to share the questions. Also, today's session is being recorded and will be available on the National Jeweler website this coming Friday, September 23rd. Now, I'll turn it over to Lenore and her guests, and I'll be back on to field any questions at the end. Thank you.
Hello, thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Andrew and Mark, for joining us. We're going to get started just by letting you both introduce yourselves. We can start with Andrew.
Great. So good afternoon, everyone, for everybody out there in the internet world. My name is Andrew Chipman. I live in Appleton, Wisconsin. I am head of the Jewelers Block Division at Berkley Asset Protection. I've been doing jewelry insurance for way too long, 18, 17 years, something like that. Been in the insurance industry for 20 plus years. So I'm looking forward to working with Mark on our webinar here. And I just want to thank the staff at National Jeweler, including Lenore, Michelle, and everybody else for this wonderful opportunity. So thanks in advance for that.
Of course, we're happy to have you. Mark?
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Lenore. My name is Mark Devereaux. I'm the Vice President of Sales and Distribution at Jewelers Mutual. And I live in North Carolina. However, I lead those efforts throughout the country, US and Canada. And been with JM for about 7 years. Actually, my anniversary is tomorrow. And been a very, very exciting 7 years at Jewelers Mutual with lots of new things that have come down the pipe that I'm sure I'll be able to share a few new things with you. But yeah, just proud to be part of the jewelry industry. My background, actually 37 years in the insurance business, but really only 7 years in the jewelry insurance business, which is very, very different and awesome and wonderful because I get to work with a lot of really cool people and just a really neat product and be part of something that's that in my mind is really special at Jewelers Mutual. And I do serve on the CJA board, Canadian Jewelers Association, as well as the MJSA board, but proud to be here today. Thanks, Lenore.
Well, we're happy to have you and happy almost anniversary. So yeah, I called in the jewelry insurance experts today because that's what we're going to be talking about. And we're going to get into some of those nitty-gritty details, but I wanted to get started with the absolute basics. And so my first question for you is, what is a jeweler's block policy? Whoever wants to tackle that first.
That's great, Mark. If you don't mind, I'll dive into it. Sure. And you can certainly add on from there. You know, it's a great question. I think one that some people take for granted. What a lot of people don't realize, and it's amazing that we still get a lot of inquiries on this, is that most business owners' policies have some pretty restrictive exclusions if you have any type of jewelry associated with your business. And that can catch people unaware, specifically some jewelry organizations. So the alternative, the solution to that is an actual jeweler's block policy. And it's really designed for anybody in the jewelry space, retailers, wholesalers, manufacturers, and it covers any type of jewelry, you know, precious metals, diamonds, watches, you know, anything of jewelry value per se. So it was a way to solve a coverage need for those in the jewelry space, and it's a pretty nifty product.
Yeah, I'll add to that. It is a special product, and it's very, very unique to the jewelry industry, as you mentioned, Andrew. It's interesting because you talk about other businesses and that have BOP policies, and it's funny, in Canada, we find that many jewelers only have a BOP policy. And they don't realize until they have a loss how restrictive of coverage that BOP policy is. So, you know, the real basics behind a jeweler's block policy is that it's really designed to cover that inventory that a jeweler has. It's designed to protect that jeweler when they're traveling with that inventory. It's designed to cover when they have, you know, those items out on memo. All those specific coverages that you're just not going to find on a basic BOP policy or coverage or a basic commercial policy. So very, very unique to the jewelry industry and something every jeweler needs in my mind.
Right. Now, I have a very layman's baseline understanding of insurance, but I understand that you have your core policies and then you have add-ons. What would you recommend a jeweler has as part of their core insurance coverage?
Yeah, the core policy, I'll take that one. The core policy really consists of that, first of all, that jeweler's block. You got to have that block policy as we just outlined. The second thing is that business owner policy. We refer to it in the industry as the BOP policy or the BOP coverage. And, you know, a BOP policy is really designed to cover property exposures that are on non-jewelry type property. For instance, your cases, your displays, your computers, your equipment, your tools, those types of things. Then also under that BOP policy, you have liability exposures. And when those liability exposures are, for instance, if somebody were to come in your store and slip or fall, or a third party type lawsuit, some sort of suit there. And then lastly, also that cover that loss of income in the event you're unable to operate due to a covered loss, that BOP policy would cover you there. The last one I would mention is an umbrella policy. You know, many of us on our personal policies will have our personal insurance agent will say, hey, if you have auto and home, you should have an umbrella that exceeds whatever, if you have a claim or a liability situation that exceeds those limits, that umbrella policy will come in and cover you as well. So those are the three things that I would certainly recommend. Andrew, anything to add?
Yeah, Mark, I just add to that, you know, you know, I know that insurance is one of those types of topics that, you know, doesn't always espouse a lot of excitement, right? But there are certain things to be aware of, and everything that Mark just added was extremely important for most businesses out there. I'd also add a workers' compensation policy so that you're protecting, you know, the safety of your employees as they're coming to work every day. That's a big one. I think that in this world of phishing and ransomware, you know, dedicated cyber policies are also a really important mix to an insurance portfolio for a jewelry operation.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to talk a little bit later on about some of those add-ons that you both offer. But insurance overall can be a little bit of a tricky topic, especially if you're not as well versed in it as you two are. What would you say is the biggest mistake business owners make when they're choosing their insurance policies?
Angie, you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, as much as jeweler's block insurance can be daunting, you know, addressing kind of what some of the biggest mistakes out there can be somewhat daunting as well, because there's a lot of things out there that, you know, we're expecting jewelry businesses to be aware of when it comes to insurance. And that's not always an intuitive type of thing to think of, right? And we get that. We understand that. People like Mark and I are, you know, trying to educate as much as possible because it is kind of a foreign concept to a lot of people. A few things that I would throw out there. I think the biggest mistake, in my opinion, is working with an insurance broker or agent that is not well versed in jewelry insurance. And that's not to minimize other types of insurance, but you know, most insurance agents can handle you for an auto policy, a homeowner's policy, even business owners policies to some extent. But you really want to work with an agent that knows what they're talking about to help you complete a jeweler's block application. Because if that doesn't get conveyed properly to an underwriter, and there's a misunderstanding, a miscommunication, all it does is create headaches on the claim side when things do go bad. And I can assure you that nobody likes it when that happens. So if I was to boil it down to the biggest mistake, I think it's working with a broker that is not well versed in jeweler's block insurance.
You know, I couldn't agree with you more on that one, Andrew. And this is to all the listeners out there, or the watchers and listeners, is that's so important. Make sure do a gut check. I know that your agent could be your friend, and but that agent might be just trained in just property and casualty. And there are some agents out there that are true specialists in the jewelry industry and understand that jeweler's block policy and all the various coverages that are associated with it. More importantly, that all the coverages that are not included in that you really need to consider other options. The thing I would add to what Andrew said is insurance to value. We've seen a lot of claims in the last 12 months where people are underinsured. And it really comes down to a situation where, what's happened in the last 12 months? Lots of inflation, lots of increased costs with regard to raw materials, lots of increased costs with regard to equipment, things of that nature. That's where that agent who's truly trained in the jewelry space can really ask all the right questions of you to make sure that you are properly insured.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And we're going to talk a little bit about underinsurance later. But to your point, both of your companies cater specifically to the needs of jewelers when it comes to insurance. So can you tell me a little bit about the insurance products you offer that cater specifically to jewelers?
Sure, I'll be happy to start. Andrew mentioned it as one of the core policies, and it really is in today's world. It probably is a core policy, and that is cyber liability and data breach. Now, that is a policy or a coverage that you can get in other businesses, but the uniqueness of the way it's applied in the jewelry industry is pretty important. The other thing that we do is the workmanship, and the workmanship coverage is provides coverage on customer items that are damaged while the jeweler is working on them. So when your bench jeweler is working on it, any liability that occurs there, that item would be covered. Equipment breakdown, and then the other one I like to mention is employment practices liability. This is the one, most jewelers out there are pretty small and they don't have like an HR department. And, this is one of those areas with regard to wrongful termination claims or third parties, claiming some degree of discrimination or what have you. Those are real coverages that come into play from time to time because maybe you didn't follow the letter of the law and maybe because you didn't know the law. So these are some coverages that are really come into play. The other thing I'll mention is, as I mentioned, I've been with Jewelers Mutual for 7 years. We started offering lots of programs and services to our jewelers, everything from shipping solutions through JM Shipping Solution to a warranty program called JM Care Plan, to personal jewelry protection, as well as the latest thing that we've recently done, and that's offered the Jewelers Mutual Appraisal Solution. So there's lots of tools out there that are available to jewelers that through Jewelers Mutual that might bring some value.
Absolutely. And Mark, obviously, a lot of great products out there. I would just circle back to the jeweler's block policy specifically, and in addition to some of the items that Mark said, the beauty of the jeweler's block policy is it can be tailored to any solution that's really needed for a jeweler. So I would encourage again that there should be some type of conversation between the jeweler, the broker, and the underwriter, because as much as we're all in this business together, there's a lot of unique situations that come up. For example, you're taking you have the opportunity to take a lot of jewelry to go see a client across the country. You're talking to two organizations here that are able to facilitate those types of requests, and it's not just one thing with the jeweler's block policy. I would say it's just the ability to tailor coverage for specific situations that come up. And again, that's where it ties back into working with the broker, working with insurance companies, that this is kind of what we do day in, day out, and just not talking to somebody that looks at you like you're an alien when they say, hey, I want to take X amount of jewelry down the road to go to JCK Jewelry Show and that type of thing. So it's just that ability to offer unique tailored solutions that I think sets us apart, both organizations apart from most of the other carriers that are out there. So.
Hey, Lenore, I'm gonna add one thing to Andrew
Sure.
said, 'cause he's spot on, man. And that is, he brought it up originally, that agent. I keep going back to the value of that agent. That agent's gonna know they're gonna know the answers to many of the general questions that a jeweler would have as it relates to traveling with items, or special endorsements that would protect in unique situations when they take their items to a show or to a small show, or even taking it somewhere, traveling with that item, just traveling in general. So it's the uniqueness of our business, the uniqueness of our policies. Really our agents play such an important role in that. And I really want to encourage people to make sure they've got a strong relationship with that agent producer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did a little bit of research before I got on here with you guys, and I was taking a look at some of the add-ons that you both offer. And there were a lot of unique ones that I was unaware of. And I'd like to talk a little bit about some of those. We mentioned this briefly a little bit before, but you both offer some form of data breach insurance. Can you talk to me a little bit more about that and what that covers?
Sure,
I'll
Andrew,
start with
you want to
Andrew.
start?
Yeah, it's with the data breach, we've actually made some changes here recently. So data breach is no longer in our portfolio. And the reason for that just simply boils down to, just like Jeweler's Block is a specialized form of coverage, what we've found is that it's just, it's such a complex field that is growing ever more complex with the ransomware, the phishing and everything like that, that's not something that we were comfortable offering going forward, because it's such a complex world. We'd rather focus on the things that we're good at: Jeweler's Block, fine art, specie type of coverage. So I would turn that back over to Mark to offer some more thought on that.
Yeah, we were similar in that we had created our own cyber policy and data breach policy, but we really took advantage of partnerships with regard to that. And we do offer it today. There's a few specific situations, like in terms of what it protects you against, is that data recovery. When someone goes in through a ransomware type of attack, it can really distort your information. I mean, it can make a mess out of your customer records. And that data recovery is a very important part of that business, or that action, obviously, to get you back up and running. The other things with regard to cost, to notify your customers whose potential personal identifiable information is breached, that there's a cost to that. There's a major cost to that. We've all probably been a part of that when we go to our mailbox and we say, hey, your data's been breached, and everybody thinks, you got that little pit in your stomach, like, uh-oh, how much interaction have I had with that company, and what was it that they may have had access to? Right. And then lastly, that credit bureau monitoring costs for affected customers. Sometimes if your data is breached and somebody gets a hold of it, it can make a mess out of your credit. So that's one of those things that our coverage will kick in and protect you against that. But in today's world, it's a very, very important coverage. And I think it's one of those things, if you don't have it today, you need to reach out and find some.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely very important, especially when your data is so valuable. Now, another add-on that I thought was particularly interesting, and I guess not one that I thought of right away because I don't work in a jewelry store in that sense. Can you tell me more about your appraisal liability coverage?
Sure. So appraisal liability is a way to protect yourself when you're providing a service to your customers. And that service, as any jeweler knows, is helping them establish a cost, a value to their jewelry items, whether it's at a point of purchase, whether it's at a time where somebody's coming in as part of an estate, other type of personal proceedings where they need to put value on certain jewelry items. Unfortunately, there are issues with that, and there are times that there can be some conflict that arises where if a value is not in agreement with the parties, you could be exposed to potential lawsuits. And so by having an appraisal liability coverage under your Jeweler's Block policy, or whatever policy can afford that coverage, it really protects you from the cost of defense more than anything, because as we all know, getting legal representation, just like Mark mentioned before, of cost of living stuff, that's one other facet that's certainly not going down in price. And so it helps you with the cost to defend that and make sure that you have good representation for those types of events as they come up.
Yeah, and I think that appraisal liability, it's a reminder to all the jewelers out there is be very careful as it relates to appraising items. And there's a lot of pros. Many of you are pros out there and have special certifications. I don't challenge folks like you, but I would challenge folks that don't have those accreditations and are actually just doing appraisals. Just to do an appraisal, or they feel like they can do that based on their education. I think it's one of those things this is where education is invaluable, and I think you need to be very, very careful about that appraisal process and what you do there. I will do a plug for JM Appraisal Solution because we did work directly with Richard Drucker on our appraisal solution. So we use a lot of the data that he has to help guide people with those smaller appraised type items. So you can certainly use that as a resource.
Yeah, absolutely. And appraisals are definitely something I personally would leave to the experts. Yeah. Now, we spoke a little bit earlier about your trade show specific coverage, which is especially important to jewelers. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? We can start with Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the trade show coverage, there are, for anybody in the jewelry business, we know that there are organizations that, sponsor trade show events, not just here in the country, but across the globe. And so any competent jeweler's block provider carrier will be able to offer that coverage. And what that looks like is typically they're going to ask the jeweler to send those goods via armored car. I'll just start with that right away because it's more of a life safety issue than anything else. Is you're removing that threat of anything happening to you by using professionals that provide armored car service to get the goods to and from. And then, the coverage also extends to while you're actually at the exhibition, the trade show. Most carriers are going to ask that the only thing that you follow through with is making sure that your booth is attended at all times with one of your employees, principals, whomever, making sure that you're displaying goods in locked showcases. And then at night, when the show is done for the day, that you're either putting goods in a safe or keeping them in an after hours guarded security room. Those are typically the what we call the warranties to provide that type of coverage. And there's a premium for that, but again, most people can either add that as a permanent part of the jeweler's block coverage, or more importantly, add it as what we call an endorsement, so that if you decide on a whim to say, hey, I'm going to go to a show, you can give up your jeweler's block underwriter a call, and they can tailor an endorsement specific to that type of coverage. I will tell you, and we'll probably get into it with the Brinks armored car thing here in a minute, but there's a lot of instances that come up in the insurance world that if you talk to people, they say, well, nothing's going to happen to me, or at this type of an event, nothing ever happens at these type of events anyways. And, we had a recent trade show where we actually had 3 losses, due to a very, crafty individual that was able to take advantage of a couple situations. And nobody ever thinks it will happen to them until it does. But that's kind of the whole purpose of insurance. So trade shows is just as much of an example of that as anything else.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add there is don't assume that you have coverage when you bring your items to a trade show. Just don't assume that, because as Andrew mentioned, endorsing that policy, or unless it's actually included in the policy to where you are covered, all year long, those are 2 very different things. So if it's one of those things they left off and the expectation is that you're going to endorse that, you remember to endorse it. You got to endorse it, because for you to have a loss and you meant to endorse it, oftentimes that's not going to be a covered loss because it just wasn't on the policy. The other thing I'll mention is as Andrew went through the coverages that exist at the show, one of the things Jewelers Mutual has been doing the last few years at a few of the higher profile shows is we're offering showcase coverage. And while they're at the show, and one of the reasons why folks love it so much is because they don't have to put things away. It's very cumbersome for them to put things away, put them in their cases, and then get them out the next day at a show. So one of the things, our goals at a showcase is to protect those items while they are in the cases for display, and then we will typically pay for additional security and things like that. So it's one of those things we try to do for the industry. But as Andrew said, I mean, this is one of those situations that if you really want to protect yourself, you might want to still put it away, because even though you have coverage, things are happening. Things are definitely happening, and we have had some recent losses at shows, whereas in the past, historically, we just have not. So it is a real thing, and it is real protection. But it's one of those things we're going to look at potentially expanding in 2023.
Lenore, just one other thing to offer, if that's all right. And I think, again, I think if you were to ask people like Mark or myself or just anybody in the jeweler's block space, as much as this is an insurance conversation, it is a lot of life safety type of things as well. One of the trends that we've been seeing, I would say since COVID, is the amount of requests for people to hand carry jewelry out of trade shows. I haven't seen anything like it. There's just been a profound increase in requests on that. And I would just state that it's, besides a challenge to do it from an underwriting perspective, just because you're leaving a venue that is known to have jewelry with a pouch or a backpack, as much of a target as you are, and that's the challenges that come from that, just really advise people to really rethink that and take the armored car option, because we want everybody to get home to their families safely, and if that's not happening, there are bigger problems in the world. So forget insurance for a second. If I could stress one message to the jewelers that are out there, please, please, please send goods back via armored car when you're at a jewelry show.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very important point. I mean, safety is paramount when you're talking about jewelry and traveling. And now, speaking of trade shows and losses at trade shows, there was a big story recently, and we spoke about a little bit before we went live. I wrote recently about the Brinks truck jewelry heist. And if you don't know that story, a group of jewelers, they were at a trade show and they hired Brinks, which is an armored car service, to transport their goods from one jewelry show to another. And long story short, somewhere along the way, the truck was broken into and the jewels were stolen. So now the jewelers are talking to Brinks and they're saying, the jewelry that we lost, it was worth $100 million and we want to be reimbursed. And Brinks looks at their paperwork and they're like, well, you only insured it for like $9 million. So that is the amount that you're entitled to. And some lawsuits and some legal actions have followed. I bring that story up because I want to talk about the issue of underinsuring your goods, which looks like was possibly the issue here. I know for some it is a way to keep costs down, but when the worst case scenario happens, you are probably out of luck. So would you both talk a little bit about the risk of underinsuring your goods?
Sure, I'll be happy to kick things off on this one, Lenore. This was a devastating loss to a lot of jewelers, and very, very unfortunate. However, it is a sign of the times, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of nothing like this surprises us anymore. So the value of insurance and the need of insurance is more important today than ever before. I guess this is where I put myself in a seat of a jeweler. And a jeweler can, consciously underinsure their property to save money, as you mentioned, and really gamble. The gamble that a loss will never happen to them. But the reality is a loss is likely to occur, or the reality is, better yet, the loss is going to occur. You just don't know when. It's going to occur. It's going to impact you at some point. So you have to ask yourself, is everything that you've worked so hard for, is it really worth that savings in premium to where you're potentially undercut you undercut yourself or short yourself out of payment, because that's really what you're doing in the long run. And so I think it's one of those situations where my advice on something like this is make sure, I go back to my earlier comment, insurance to value. Make sure that you are insuring based on your real loss or the exposed loss that you can handle. Okay, that's another question you can ask yourself. But these shows, when these folks were involved in this, we saw this. By the way, we had some insurers that were involved with this, and they piggybacked off of some other folks to where say, oh, I'll just ship with their stuff, and so as a result, there's only so much money, and as a result, they shorted themselves out of payment. So I think it's one of those things that's a reminder. Make sure you have good memo agreements in place, and just make sure that you're consciously ensuring that those items to value.
Just a couple of things to add. I think Mark hit most of that on the head, and couldn't agree with him more about the underinsurance piece. One of the things I think that Berkley does a great job of is we have a basis evaluation, right? And one of the things that we throw in is we do wholesale replacement costs on the date of the loss. So if you are underinsuring, you're only hurting yourself when there's that loss, because if you haven't insured correctly, it's a nice basis evaluation to make sure that you're really not going to be out of pocket when that day comes, if there is some type of loss. And as Mark kind of made mention to, it's not just trade shows where we have found people underinsuring. It's also the stock limits at people's jewelry organizations, specifically retailers, or the amount that they're getting memo coverage for, the amount that they're traveling with, and so it's not just limited to one scope of jewelry operations. And I think Mark and I would both stress, just really know that nobody has that crystal ball. Nobody knows when that bad day is going to come. And, as much as nobody wants to pay more insurance premium, it really dwarfs into comparison to what that catastrophic loss looks like, and maybe not even be able to continue on with your jewelry organization if that does happen. So.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And I think, a lot of the jewelers that were affected by that heist in particular were those smaller jewelers who really did take a hit to their livelihood. And that's very sad. But to the point of insurance costs, on the topic of saving money, the cost of living has been increasing for most of us recently. Has the cost of insurance followed? What has that trend looked like? Whoever wants to tackle that first.
Yeah, Mark, you or me. I can dive into it if that's all right, Mark.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
And I think that I thought a lot about this question, right? And I would say that that plays into it a little bit as well. Mark made mention to some of the reasons of what that's looking like for jewelers out there. I would reposition it a little differently, though. I think what makes jewelers block insurance so challenging right now, and probably why people have seen their premiums increase over the last couple of years, is more due to a couple of different items outside of just cost of living. I would point more towards, unfortunately, across the country, we've just seen a tremendous amount of general lawlessness that is out there, and that is demonstrated by any number of different things. More burglaries, more people just swarming jewelry stores, and really coming in and doing a smash, grab, and run. All sorts of different losses, and it's not just confined to one area. Unfortunately, this general lawlessness has really been a nationwide epidemic now for quite some time. At least for the past couple of years. And that makes it a challenge, because jewelry organizations are unfortunately an attractive target for that. The other part of it, I think, that plays into it as well, in terms of rates being on the rise, is shipping carriers had to do a lot of things to continue to be able to operate in a COVID environment. But unfortunately, that was to the detriment of jewelry organizations and jewelry insurance companies. And by that, I mean that people weren't getting signatures. I think that there was a rush with just a tremendous increase in shipping volume overall, that it led to just some things that led to some carelessness into shipping. And as a result of that, shipping's been a real challenge as well. So I think that all of that combined with some of the cost of living things is why jewelers unfortunately are seeing some premium increase over the last couple of years.
Yeah, our frequency this year and last year has been extremely high. It's increased over the last 10 years prior to that. So, and largely because of shipping, largely because of the criminal aspect that we're seeing within the jewelry industry. You know, there's a lot of crime out there, and there's some violent crime that's occurring. That's one of the reasons why we've started the process of certainly beefing up our loss prevention efforts and making sure jewelers are aware as to what's going on around them, what's going on in their local community, and all the different what services can they take advantage of to give that redundancy, to put that redundancy in place to make sure that their businesses and their employees are protected and their customers as well. And it's just one of those things that our business, I think the insurance block business and even the BOP too, it has been underpriced for some time, particularly as these trends have started to kick in and roll up. So that's one of the reasons why you are seeing this. But the last thing I'll say is, if you built a house in the last few years or made house renovations, or all those materials have gone up, and so everybody's paying more, and so that's trickling down to a jeweler as well. And we're certainly hearing that feedback from many of you out there in jeweler land for sure. So but yeah, it's just that's really what's pointing to those increases.
Yeah, I mean, I understand there's definitely a lot that goes into the cost, but I appreciate your frank, honest answers. We're going to end on a little bit of a lighter note here. I chose insurance as a webinar topic because I think it's interesting. I think it's important information for jewelers to have. But there was a part of me that was a little bit worried, and I thought, are people going to think this is a boring topic? Are we going to have really low attendance because they're like, oh, insurance, like, no, thank you. So I'm giving you guys both these last few minutes to talk about why insurance is actually fun. What do you enjoy about working in insurance? We can start with Mark.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, like I said, I've been in the business 37, 38 years now, in the insurance business. I can tell you without a doubt, the best of those years have been the last 7 years with Jewelers Mutual. And the reason why it's fun is because of the jewelry industry, obviously. And it's what the jewelry industry delivers to the consumer out there, and the role that all of you play out there in helping share memories and share and celebrate important times in people's lives. And so, for us, it's about, when we look at a jewelry store or a manufacturer or designer or wholesaler, what have you, these are businesses that are built on emotion. And for us, from an insurance standpoint, for us, we're insuring really that emotional business that has been built on making people feel good and making people feel alive and loved, and all of those things, all those wonderful adjectives you can give. And quite frankly, when we can kind of bring somebody back together after they've had a loss, or whether it be our relieve benefit, or whether it be the actual payment of a claim or a personalized claim or what have you, when we can play a role in that and then talk to those individuals after that claims experience, and it's such a positive one, and there's a connection there literally forever, that's powerful. And that's one of those things that I say to all of my other insurance buddies out there who are not in the jewelry insurance business, I said, boy, have I got something special that you guys don't have. So that's what I would say is a positive for me.
Absolutely. And those are all, I mean, I would definitely concur with all of that. I go back, kind of echo Mark's comments, right? I think the people are probably the biggest reason why we're all in this industry. And, besides my colleagues that I work with, that, it's just one of those things when you're all in it together. You'd love to figure out more ways to celebrate with each other, but the colleagues that I work with just are tremendous assets to why I come in and do it every day. I think the brokers, are just some of the most knowledgeable people out there, and just able to figure out a way to make a solution for a jeweler and for an insurance company, and somehow make it all work so that we can all keep moving forward in this world. So I think that's a big part of it. And then just going to the jewelry trade shows and being able to know that I've had relationships with these jewelers that you can go up to, you can give them a hug, handshake, fist pump, whatever, and you can really kind of count them almost as friends, and I think that the people part of it is just the biggest. It's just the biggest part of it, and secondly, without, really getting too insurance nerdy, but for anybody who's worked for an insurance organization, there is a certain, just minutia to it with some of the data and what you're allowed to kind of do. With jewelry insurance, it's just nothing further could be true. It's ability to have conversations with jewelers and brokers and figure out solutions that work in those specific circumstances. And not a lot of insurance jobs give you that opportunity, but this one does. And so it makes sure that no day is like the day prior, and definitely keeps things very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it must be a nice feeling to be able to be there for a jeweler in their time of need. Okay, so maybe insurance isn't that fun, but jewelry insurance is for sure pretty fun.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, that is it for my questions. I really appreciate both of you being here. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle now and see if we have any audience questions that came in.
Thanks, Lenore, Mark, and Andrew. That was a great discussion. And Lenore, for what it's worth, it was not at all boring. That was really, really interesting. And thanks to our sponsor, Jewelers of America. As a reminder to our guests today, you can still type questions into the Zoom Q&A box, and I'll get to as many as possible. We had a bunch that were submitted before the webinar, and they're all really good. I'm going to give people a little more time to enter questions live here, and I just want to say a quick word about Jewelers of America while they're doing that. Jewelers of America is the leading trade association in the United States, offering members representation, recognition, and resources to help grow their businesses and improve consumer confidence. Are you in? Become a member today for only $99. Visit jewelers.org/join to learn more. That is jewelers.org/join. Thank you so much. Now let's get started with our listener questions. A lot of the questions kind of revolve around two topics. People have a lot of questions about appraisals, and people also had a lot of questions that are related to travel. So I'm going to start with this one. Please discuss the best way to store gemstones and jewelry in a hotel room that does not have a safe.
Mark, do you want me to take a stab at that one?
Yeah, Andrew, I think you'll be better served to take the lead on that one. Thank you.
Absolutely. So when it comes to traveling with jewelry, there's just a lot of things to keep in mind. And we talked about that general lawlessness before. What we see is that when you're on the road traveling with jewelry, the issue always becomes is that it only takes one moment of just not being aware of your surroundings for something to go incredibly wrong. And so what we always recommend to people is if there's no hotel room safe available, I would almost encourage people, it's not worth the risk to leave it unattended in your hotel room. order room service, get Uber Eats. You know, nobody had the pleasure of getting Uber Eats like 10 years ago, and now that they've just made that much easier to get food delivered to your hotel room. It's just, again, that one moment where you think, I'll only be gone for 5 minutes to go pick up something to eat, I'll be right back. That's when the loss will occur, you know. And so just taking those moments to say, what can I do so that it's always in my possession, will increase the chances of something not really happening to you.
The only thing I'll add to that, Andrew, is, you know, it's hard for me to say this, but I am going to say it, is, you know, more times than not, there's somebody watching. There's somebody watching, and we've seen a lot of losses that have occurred where people have been literally followed for miles, and they've been followed on previous trips, just waiting for that opportunity. So you have to almost have that mindset of, hey, somebody's watching me. I know that's kind of creepy and it doesn't feel real good and all that, but the reality is you've got something of value that somebody else wants, that somebody else could easily turn into cash or what have you. So it's just one of those things to be aware of.
One other thing, and that's a great point, Mark, is that, you know, these organizations that they're almost like professionals in and of themselves. You know, they that's their full-time job, is they're watching and they're waiting. And as Mark said, we don't want that to sound creepy, but that's just the reality of the world. One alternative that I'll throw out there that we've been seeing utilized a little bit more of, and I think it helps from a security perspective, is that a lot of jewelers, when they're traveling with their jewelry, will send it via armored car, and they'll have their jewelry kept at an armored car facility at whatever hub city that they may be traveling to or from. And so you're therefore eliminating having to travel with that jewelry. You can go pick it up from that armored car facility, make your daily appointments, and then return it back at the end of the day for it to be sent back to wherever your, you know, business operations is housed out of. You know, nothing will ever remove the threat entirely, but a lot of jewelers have been using that service, and I do think that that's a great way to help minimize some of the threat of it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. The next question relates travel. Is there insurance available for exhibiting jewelry at trunk shows in other countries?
Absolutely. So, you know, again, the beauty of the jeweler's block policy, we can tailor coverage however is needed. So that does not just apply to the United States. You know, if there's a conversation about where you're traveling internationally, where you're shipping to internationally, where you might be memoing goods to internationally, there's a solution in there. So don't let that preclude you from asking your broker to talk with your carrier about where you're thinking about going to, whether it's trade show or otherwise, and figuring out how we can craft a solution for that international type of exposure. That's very much a very doable thing.
And it is, and if it wasn't a doable thing, this is where the art of, you know, securing other coverage to a third party or what have you, those coverages are available out there. So whether it be through a good company like Berkley or through Jewelers Mutual, it could be that your broker may have to go through, if it's a real special situation, may have to go through a third party through Lloyd's or what have you. But that coverage is available out there. So just it's a matter of building out that relationship with that broker.
And like you're saying, just ask, tell them what your needs are, and but right, like you said many times, don't assume
Right.
that you're just covered. You need to look at the policy and you need to ask.
Right.
Someone else wanted to know, just got a question here. What if you have a private invitation only event at your home of jewelry, or I mean, also like if people have a trunk show in a specific location, you know, what are the insurance thoughts there? And the same person wanted to know, is it safe to store jewelry in your house? And I think John Kennedy that's a big no from John Kennedy, I know, taking jewelry home with you. But thoughts on, you know, having a jewelry show, a trunk show, if you will, in your home, or, you know, a different retail location or a different location altogether?
Yeah, once again, Michelle, that's one of those situations. John Kennedy is right. Obviously, we're big supporters of JSA. We don't really like the thought of that at all, to just because you're exposing yourself and your family. But in the event you were to have some sort of a show or want to do something like that, again, that's one of those things of securing, making sure it's like traveling with jewelry, and making sure that you're endorsing that policy properly to say, hey, I'm going to be taking X amount of dollars to a different place, and here's the here's the potential risk, so that underwriter can evaluate that. Andrew?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Totally agree with you. Taking jewelry home with you is definitely something to be avoided at all costs. Unfortunately, what we've seen over the last, it's always been present, is that, if they know that you're taking jewelry at home, again, if they're watching you and they get to know your patterns, when you leave to take the family out for dinner, it's something that can be easily accessed because they'll have the right tools. Worst case scenario is that you're there when it happens, and it's really not worth exposing your family to that. The tough thing, and I get it again for jewelry organizations, it can be tough, right? Because we're just telling you, hey, call your broker and ask, right? Just to provide a little bit more clarity to it on trunk shows specifically, right? There's just a big difference between somebody who wants to take, $100,000 of jewelry and take it to a local, maybe fine art gallery as in a partnership with them and display goods for some type of private event, versus wanting to take, $3, $4, $5 million to the local golf club, for an event for members only, right? And that's where, we don't mean to be, flip and just saying, just call, but we don't want to minimize the fact that every situation is a little bit different and unique. And that's where we're just trying to make sure that we can collect that narrative, what's going on, and then give you a solution that works for that specific event. So trunk shows especially tend to be kind of all over the board in terms of what's happening. But,
Right.
as Mark would tell you, and I would tell you, it's just a matter of let's have that conversation. We'll figure out a solution for you.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. I want to move on to a question involving appraisal. Somebody want to know appraisal liabilities. What are the biggest risks?
I'll start this one from an appraisal liability standpoint. The biggest risks are, and we've seen this, where somebody is appraising something and they just don't, as I mentioned before, aren't accredited to evaluate that particular item. And so oftentimes we'll see that. I would definitely recommend that, obviously a gemologist would be that individual, somebody who's certified in appraising, and making sure they've got all the tools to make sure that they're appraising something accurately. That's certainly the most important thing that we see. But Andrew, you may be able to add some more here.
Yeah, I think Mark's hit it on the head here. I think the education's a big piece, right? Being dedicated to the trade, I think, is evidenced by the fact that you're willing to make a commitment into your own education. I would absolutely agree with Mark on that piece of it. I think that it plays itself out also in that if you were to work with your peers across the jewelry trade, when we see things go bad, it's typically because people don't really provide a good enough description of the item. They don't have the necessary, legal wording that I think helps, kind of clearly demonstrate the service that they're actually providing and what it's intended for. And I think that, some of those things just come along with the education piece that Mark mentioned.
And I will add again that Jewelers Mutual Appraisal Solution, we've worked really, really hard to make sure we have some of that wording in there. So a jeweler can customize that appraisal for their store. And if you haven't checked that out, certainly go to jewelersmutual.com/zing and you'll see the appraisal solution out there.
Thank you. We also have, we have time for 2 more questions here. So I'm going to do one on repairs and one on something to do with a bench jeweler. First, someone wanted to know, I'm taking in a 2-carat diamond ring for $120 tightening. How do I document what we were taking in and manage risk?
So, Mark, if you don't mind, I'll try to tackle that one. So one of the things that we didn't really talk about is what's covered under a jeweler's block policy. Is most any reputable jeweler's block carrier, as part of their definition of what they're providing coverage to you for as part of your stock limit, will include customers' goods that you're taking in for things like repair or appraisal. And so, in these cases where you're asking, hey, I've got a very valuable ring, I'm only doing a $120 job, what should I do? What we have seen work best is really document, having some type of ticketing system so that not only you have a record of what you're taking in, but are also able to provide a copy to the customer so that they have a record of it when they leave. And it can be difficult sometimes, but a transparent conversation to really have a good idea from both parties of what that item is worth and really having that documented. So then that way, if there's something unfortunate happens, at least we're starting from the same ballpark, versus now you thought that ring was $5,000, that customer thinks it's $50,000. So I think documentation is key when those types of customer repairs come in.
And I think an important part of that process, obviously, is photography and taking a photo of that item when it comes in and documenting it, that this is what it looked like when it came in, and this is what it looked like after we've completed the repairs.
So photos as well.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. So we're going to have time for one last question. Somebody once said, I'd like to know about insurance requirements regarding torches in an in-home studio.
I'm going to let you have that one, Andrew.
Yeah. So, one of the things we talked about when we began the conversation is just the many different types of insurance policies that a jeweler has available to them. So when it comes to, running a torch in a repair shop, whether that's at your house, whether that's at your business, that's going to, God forbid, a fire starts as a result of that, right? I think that's where this question is going. That's where you really want to have a clear definition as to if there's any restrictions on your homeowner's policy for running a business out of your homeowner's policy, or if you need to get some additional coverage through them, and or having a specific business owner's policy, because that's going to cover that type of property damage that doesn't really relate to jewelry. You're talking about structure that might result on something like that. Mark?
No, I think you covered it. I don't really have anything to add to that one. I think the BOP coverage is what is going to be the main coverage in play there.
Michelle, one last thing. We were talking about exciting things that were happening with the companies. And one thing I forgot to mention is, for those that didn't see the press release, one of the other parts that we're excited about is we were able to partner with Signet Jewelers on our lavalier personal jewelry insurance program, and just wanted to make sure that people were aware of that. I think that kind of just goes into just that general excitement of the jewelry insurance world and the things that are ever changing.
And yeah, and Lenore wrote about that today, so we were aware of that.
I did. I was just going to plug my own story, but thank you for doing it for me.
Mark and Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today. I think this has been really informative. And Lenore, thank you for hosting.
Yeah, of course. It was fun.
Was it, Andrew, Mark, was it fun?
It was great. It was great. Thanks for giving us the opportunity.
Yeah,
Andrew doesn't look like he had much fun.
No, it was great. And two organizations that obviously know the jewelry industry very well. If everybody, that sat in on this, hopefully they, were able to take something away on it. I know that Mark and I are always available for questions, but just thanks to you guys for providing the forum for the conversation.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Well, thank you again for joining us. My next question will return again next month with all new episodes. In the meantime, you can access all of our past webinars at nationaljeweler.com/webinars/recorded. Thanks again for joining us today, and please take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye,
Thanks,
guys.
guys.
Bye.